So as promised in my creator-focused versus character-focused omnibus video, I will be talking about event omnibuses today, the good, the bad, the weird, and more specifically focused on the mapping more so than what's collected. Let's get into it.
It's morphin' time!
Hello, this is Soundout here, and on today's video we're talking about event omnibuses. And so event omnibuses are omnibus collections of specific comic events. Sometimes things are labeled as events that don't seem like they should be. Sometimes an event is obvious, like this is a big X-Men Avengers Eternals crossover. That is an event. Infinity Wars is an event. Some of these things would just be considered crossovers and not full events. We'll talk about all the things about them. And we're specifically going to talk about the way that they're mapped and what are the pros and cons of the way that certain things are done. Now, this is going to be a video that's a broad overview, just like my creator-focused versus character-focused omnibuses, because I can't cover absolutely everything. There's too many. I'm going to be going over broad examples. I'm going to be getting into, like, I kind of picked one for each type I've seen, and it may be some of these things I don't actually own, and I've just done research through videos and online sources. So if I get something wrong, please let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, hit the like button, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss out on future comic videos. And the like button lets me know you enjoyed this and want to see more. So we're going to get into it. It's going to be, again, kind of a broad reach, but I think it'll be fun to kind of talk about what makes a good event omnibus, at least in my opinion, because there are a couple different ways that they can go about it. And let's get into all the differences that we can find. Okay, so where we're going to begin is talking about what makes an event. A comic event is a kind of a nebulous term because, for example, this Avengers Forever omnibus contains the Avengers Assemble crossover, which is a pretty big event. It's multiverse spanning. There's giant, big cosmic things happening, and is the culmination of an entire writer's run on Avengers. It's multi-part. It's big. I would consider that an event for the Avengers comics. However, it is not really an event in the sense of it's not a company-wide event, and there's no standalone Avengers Assemble miniseries. It is simply issues of Avengers Forever and Avengers crossing over. So this, Avengers Forever hardcover is not a event omnibus, right? Because it is just crossing over two titles. While it has big ramifications, it's just crossing over two titles, so it has the issues of Avengers Assemble, Alpha and Omega, which are kind of like capping off the crossover between Avengers Forever and Avengers 2018. So for me, I wouldn't consider this an event. I just consider this a crossover. So we're not going to be talking about anything like this. That being said, this is mapped in reading order very excellently because you get all of Avengers Forever and then it goes into the crossover with Avengers, which means it makes a nice pairing to the Avengers by Jason Aaron hardcovers that already existed because these ended before the crossover. So this is like, a nice continuing sequence of books. Sometimes Marvel does consider something an event, even when I wouldn't. For example, House of X, Powers of X. These are two interconnected series that kicked off the Krakoan age of X-Men. It is two 6-issue miniseries that alternate titles in reading order, which this hardcover does do. But Marvel does officially consider this an event because they did not include it in the first Krakoa Omnibus. So this is considered an event, even though there's no tie-in issues. It is two standalone miniseries. And then maybe they just did that because it's kind of easy to sell House of X, Powers of X is like, this is one of the best X-Men stories of all time, and it's a nice, standalone read. So it's interesting what is and isn't considered an event, but for typical event coverage, I think a lot of us in the comic community would say if it has a standalone miniseries and tie-ins, that makes it an event. So let's go forward with that knowledge. So let's talk about a well-mapped event, in my personal opinion, which is Judgment Day. So Judgment Day is a crossover between Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals, and it does feature a standalone miniseries, right? So there is a bunch of issues, but there is a Judgment Day 1-6. So the way this book is mapped out is what I would like to see from Marvel events, because Marvel events get a little bloated. Let's be honest, like anybody that's been following Marvel events in recent years, they always seem to have like an insane amount of tie-in issues, and some of them seem like they're so tangentially unrelated. Like this is an Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals crossover, and yet one of the tie-in issues of this book is Iron Fist. And it's like, what's Iron Fist doing here? There's always one, like, with Marvel events lately, there's always like one character. It's like, why are you here? So this crossover, though, is mapped out, I think, very well. And what I mean by that, this is not a table of contents page, by the way. This is just what's included. It's not how it's mapped. But basically, the way they map this book makes me happy, because what you have is it starts with the Free Comic Book Day prelude issue story. That's kind of setting up the events of Axe Judgment Day. Then it goes into Eve of Judgment, the prequel issue, which makes total sense because it's the prequel. Then you get Judgment Day #1. The rest of the book is mapped in a very interesting format where you have the majority of the main story. Any of the issues that start with the Axe title. So, for example, the Axe title here being, Death to Mutants is a 3-issue miniseries, Avengers, X-Men, Eternals, Star Fox, all of those. Those are mapped in sequence with the main 6-issue Judgment Day miniseries. The other tie-ins showing what characters were doing during the events of Judgment Day, X-Men Red, Immortal X-Men, X-Men, Legion of X, Marauders, Wolverine, X-Force, Amazing Spider-Man, as well as Avengers, Captain Marvel, Fantastic Four, and Iron Fist. Those are all put between the final issue of Judgment Day and the Judgment Day Omega that is the end of the story, right? So basically the way they did this, and I think this was really, really smart, is that the main core part of the story, the stuff that intersects with itself, the stuff that's very essential to following the main story, is all put together in reading order. And then the side stuff, the stuff that's not as important, is then put in between the final issue of the main series and the Omega issue that is the epilogue. I think as a reading order, this makes total sense. It allows you to have a nice, consistent order, so that way the main story makes sense without getting bogged down by, like, why are we dealing with, X-Force being hunted by Kraven the Hunter? That doesn't seem to be relevant to the main story. It's not. It's just a thing that was happening during this time. So I appreciate the fact that they mapped it to make a good reading order and then include the other issue tie-ins as part of an aside before wrapping it all up in an epilogue. Personally speaking, I think that's a great way to map a comic event, especially one that has this many tie-in issues as is. Now, I don't have the omnibus for Annihilation, but I have done my research, and it is very similar to the trade paperbacks of Annihilation, which is that Annihilation was an event where you had a bunch of lead-in miniseries. Drax the Destroyer 1-4, Annihilation Prologue, Annihilation Nova 1-4, then it went into Annihilation Super Skrull 1-4, Ronan 1-4, Silver Surfer 1-4, and then you actually got to the 6-issue Annihilation series, and then the 2-issue Heralds of Galactus epilogue series. This is kind of the way they should be mapped, which is that everything is building and leading to the main Annihilation event. So I'm glad that the Omnibus reflects this, because this is a storyline where the build-up is important before you get to the actual main 6-issue event. It wouldn't make sense, for example, to have Annihilation 1-6 and then all the other miniseries afterward. Keep that in mind as we go forward, because that is not a universal thing with Marvel. Okay, let's talk about the intersection between event omnibuses and creator-focused omnibuses, and that's where we get the Infinity Wars by Jerry Duggan Complete Collection. This is not an omnibus, this is a deluxe hardcover, but this is a very fascinating thing. There is no omnibus for the Infinity Wars storyline. There is just this deluxe hardcover by Jerry Duggan. Now, this is interesting because I find this is a really well-mapped book, despite the fact that you are kind of missing a chunk of stuff. So this contains the Adam Warlock one-shot, the Countdown Prime, the Countdown 5-issue series, Infinity Wars Prime, and the Infinity Wars 6-issue series, Fallen Guardian, Infinity, and a bit from Thanos Legacy. This is meant to be everything written by Jerry Duggan, which also means it is the core part of the event. Everything that is relevant to the Infinity Wars event is included in this hardcover. And then this hardcover makes a nice companion to the Guardians of the Galaxy by Jerry Duggan Omnibus, because this is the sequel to the Jerry Duggan Guardians of the Galaxy run. And they paused that Guardians run to do this event. So this is kind of like a Jerry Duggan Guardians Volume 2 that also involves more of the Marvel Universe. And so what you get is you get pretty much just the main stuff. Now, there's other tie-ins. There was a Sleepwalker miniseries, because once again, you always have to ask the question, why is this character here in a Marvel event? So there was like a Sleepwalker miniseries. There was this thing called Infinity Warps. There's all kinds of stuff that was done as tie-ins by other creators, and it's not included in this book. It's one of those things where nowadays they would make an omnibus that included everything, and you would get all the main story, and then you get all the side material. And I would hope that in an omnibus like that, it would be basically this book for the first half, and then the back half would be all that side material. But it's a very interesting thing, because in this instance, for Infinity Wars, going creator focus does narrow the focus of the story and keep it to what is the essential parts of the event itself without too many side tangents. But there's not a companion volume in omnibus size for the rest of the tie-ins, if that's something you're looking for. So omnibus mapping can be interesting. I know we're back to Judgment Day. I have a point here. Sometimes when they map omnibuses, they'll map around an event. Essentially, like one volume, say for example, one volume of Avengers would end right before Judgment Day, so you could read Judgment Day next, and then the next volume would continue after that. That would be one way to do it. There's omnibus lines that do that. Judgment Day is not a great example, because the one Avengers issue in Judgment Day, issue 60, is also in the Jason Aaron Volume 5 hardcover, which makes sense because it's just one issue, but the actual like Avengers related stuff is still here, so you have to kind of pause reading that to come over that. Now, that Jason Aaron hardcover is not an omnibus, it's just a deluxe hardcover. They haven't done an omnibus of the Jason Aaron run, and honestly, because of how close to the end of the Jason Aaron run it is, they're probably not going to put a gap in for Judgment Day. Just kind of the way it is. But that does mean if you are collecting the Jason Aaron omnibuses or the Jason Aaron Avengers in oversized hardcover, you're double dipping a bit with Judgment Day. We don't know yet if the Krakoa omnibuses will have an X-Men, will it lead up to Judgment Day, break, and then start back up after Judgment Day? Possibly, because this book is 70% X-Men, but we don't know for sure. We'll have to wait and see how they do it. Now, sometimes they will change it up, and you think maybe they would map around an omnibus event, but then they don't. Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky. This is very interesting to me. So when they announced Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky Volume 1, people thought it was odd that the book only went up to issue 30, I think. Yeah. The first one goes up to issue 30, for the second one picking up at issue 31. Well, a lot of people thought maybe the first one would be issues 1 through 36, because Devil's Reign takes place after 36. And that's a very important storyline for Daredevil. You can't leave it out. And it was written by Chip Zdarsky. And they had announced a Devil's Reign omnibus that contains the entire main series and all of the tie-ins, and that had already been coming out. Then they announced Volume 2, and Volume 2 contains 31 to 36, and then it also contains, look at this, Devil's Reign 1 to 6 and Omega, and then Daredevil 1 to 14. See, the thing is, this second volume, if they had jumped over the gap for Devil's Reign, the second volume would have only been 14 issues, and that it was a little light. This is the way they ultimately decided to do it. Now, this does mean if you are collecting, if you did buy the Devil's Reign omnibus, you now are duplicating, what is that, 10 issues? Yeah, that's a bit of an issue for some people, and it is kind of annoying, and I will admit that. Now, for me, I liked Devil's Reign as an event, but personally speaking, the only thing I needed was the main miniseries and the Daredevil Woman Without Fear tie-in featuring Elektra Natchios' Daredevil, because that was the stuff I was personally interested in seeing and honing overall. I read all the Devil's Reign tie-ins when they came out on Marvel Unlimited, and I had decided I don't really need the other ones. But that does mean if you just want Devil's Reign without the Zdarsky omnibuses, you do have a complete collection there. But I think it is great that the Devil's Reign series is included in the reading order here, because it does make sense. It's a major storyline. There's no way this works without Devil's Reign included. And that, I think, is super cool that they actually included an event in here. Again, the creator wrote it, so it's, keeping with the theme of the book. But I'm glad that they included this as opposed to skipping over it completely and just having an awkward gap. Because if you were just reading Daredevil 36 to Daredevil number 1, it wouldn't make any sense without reading Devil's Reign. So this is kind of an interesting case, because sometimes they map around the event omnibuses, sometimes they include the events where it's appropriate. There's really not like one solid way of doing it. I will say there is one solid way of doing it wrong. And I also want to say I'm not a professional comic book editor nor a collected editions editor. This is my personal opinion based on experiences of collecting comics for many years and reading them for even longer. I have thoughts. All this to this point, all things I've mentioned, the mapping of Judgment Day where the non-essential tie-ins are moved to the back, the mapping of like crossovers in reading order or keeping just the Jerry Duggan or Chip Zdarsky stuff of those events, that's all exceptions. Most Marvel events are mapped like this Damnation trade. Yeah, I know I'm bringing a trade out. There's no Omnibus of Damnation, so work with me here. So basically, Damnation was a comic event. And the comic event here was Doctor Strange Damnation 1-4, Doctor Strange 386 to 389, Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider Damnation, Iron Fist 78 to 80, and Scarlet Spider Ben Reilly 15 to 17. This is the contents, right? Now, the interesting part about this book is it tells you the reading chronology on the front page, where it's like, okay, between Damnation 1 and 2, you got Doctor Strange, these are happening at the same time. There's kind of like this, here's where everything takes place. Why would you do that on a paperback collection of an event? That's because they put all of Damnation, all 4 issues, up front. So you've got Damnation 1-4 to start. And that's going to be the entire main miniseries event, which gives you a bunch of editor's notes saying, go read this other thing, even though this other thing is, in the same book. They didn't put it exactly in the right order. I don't know if I've moved past the Damnation event yet. It's hard to remember. There we go. So then, basically, after your Damnation event, then you get the Doctor Strange tie-ins, and then after the Doctor Strange tie-ins, you get, I think it's Iron Fist or something like that. Basically, you just get those tie-ins in order pretty much alphabetically. There's the Johnny Blaze one-shot. You get the alphabetical tie-ins all throughout here. So why is this an issue? Well, on the surface, it's not an issue because it does at least include all of the tie-ins. And if you do read the Damnation series on its own, it reads pretty consistently. There are major events, like what happens to Johnny Blaze is not explained in the Damnation event. You do need to read that one shot. But you do have all the issues here, and they provided a nice chronology up front. So if you wanted to read it in order, you're going to have to do a lot of flipping back and forth, but you could do this. Now, unfortunately, this is how Marvel has chosen to do most of their event omnibuses. Put the whole main miniseries up front, then put all the tie-ins behind it. And that works for some events, and then for others, it's a complete disaster. Welcome to a source of inspiration for the entire video, the Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of X Omnibus. This is officially, and probably for the rest of time, the last Krakoa-era Omnibus collection. It is huge. It is massive. It contains a lot of things. So when we talk about this, let's talk about what is included here. So we've got Fall of the House of X 1-5, Rise of the Powers of X 1-5, X-Men 30-35. Material from 35 means it comes with 2/3 of it. There's one story that's the next era of X-Men that they left out, which makes sense. Resurrection of Magneto 1-4, Dead X-Men 1-4, X-Men Forever 1-4, Invincible Iron Man 13-20, Avengers 12-13, Miss Marvel Mutant Menace 1-4, and Cable 1-4. Well, how did they map it? And that is the source of the problem, because unlike other events, this doesn't feel like an event, but a culmination of the Krakoa era. A very interconnected era, all things considered. So what is included is all of that, which no table of contents page of the actual order they're in, made researching this video hard. But the issue we have here, and again, I'm not going to point fingers, I'm not going to blame, but I have a problem with it. I have a critique to have. So it starts off with the free comic, I think it's the Free Comic Book Day story, and then it leads us into Fall of the House of X, #1, Trial of Cyclops. From there, we go into the next issue included is Rise of the Powers of X #1, The Last Dream of Professor X. So much like the House of X, Powers of X series that kicked off Krakoa, they have alternated Fall and Rise. And that's kind of how they were published as well. So basically, this is what it does for the first 10 issues of this book. It's just going to alternate between Rise and Fall, or, Fall and Rise, Fall and Rise. The kind of idea that it's going to be reversing between these two miniseries until you get to the end of them. So you can see Chapter 3 is Fall of the House of X number 2. So let's get past this where we end up. Okay, so now we can see Chapter 11 is X-Men number 30. Then it's going to be all the X-Men issues 30 to 35, which means 35, the last issue of the Krakoa era that wraps up everything, is right there in the book. Then after that, you get the bonus story from X-Men 35, and then it goes into Resurrection of Magneto. When they did Judgment Day, and they had the Omega issue, which was the epilogue to culminate the entire storyline, they put it at the end because that made a lot of sense. Here they put the culmination of Krakoa right here in the first third of the book, which is not a great reading order. And then basically from here, as you can imagine, I'm just going to put this image of Storm up because why not? As you can imagine, the rest of the series are just presented. It's Resurrection of Magneto 1 to 4. It's those Iron Man issues. It's the Avengers issues. Everything's just I don't want to say randomly, but they're put in an order where you're just reading an entire miniseries. Here's the problem. Fall of the House of X, Rise of the Powers of X is not a great event to have mapped like this because essentially the series kind of break down into importance. There are a bunch of events that are referenced in the main two miniseries that happen in X-Men, they happen in Dead X-Men, they happen over in Invincible Iron Man. There are storylines not resolved or even referenced to being resolved except in those other books. There is a reading order that was put out by Marvel as the books came out. This was the publication order. This is a screenshot from the last page of Fall of the House of X issue 1, and it shows where everything falls in line. Now, this is not an exact thing either because X-Force and Wolverine take place prior to the Fall and Rise, but as it went along, you could kind of see, these are the publication order. And I will say, if at least it was in publication order, it would help to make sense. The problem is that they did this same exact issue with the trade paperbacks. The trade paperbacks, they excised the side series. So, for example, Dead X-Men doesn't make any sense on its own. It needs to be bundled in with Fall of the House of X because it ties into that. All this stuff is so interconnected that the best way this should have been approached is like, all right, here's a Fall of House of X issue, and then here's all the issues that connect to that issue. All right, now we have a Rise of the Powers of X issue, and here's all the issues that connect to that issue. So that way you get the going back and forth between two time periods, between the multiple books. The only things that should have been put towards the back would have been Resurrection of Magneto, the Avengers issues, Miss Marvel, Mutant Menace, and the Cable miniseries. Because those aren't super tied in. They're kind of happening off to the side. They can be placed at the end. But X-Men 35 should have been the last thing in this book because that's the end of the Krakoan age. The other bummer part, too, is, like I said, there's no table of contents which would allow us to be able to flip to these issues easily on our own reading order. So it's kind of a pain in the butt to read the era in this form, and it's a real shame because there's a very low chance Marvel reprints this later with a different reading order. This book is a bummer. I still bought it because it is going to be, all these issues are likely only released in this format, so that's the best we're going to do. But it is a bummer that it's not, easily readable front to back. Because even reading it weekly, I was starting to lose track of the storyline. So it's one of those things where you're going to have a PDF document opened up to tell you which order to read the issues in because a lot of it won't make sense without it. And it's a bummer that this book is mapped this way and not more like the Judgment Day one. It's also a bummer that a lot of books are mapped this way. Civil War Omnibus, from what I understand, the World War Hulk Omnibus as well. It's standard for Marvel to do main miniseries up front, tie-ins in the back, which for a bunch of stories is fine. For others, it doesn't work. And it just is a little bit of a bummer that this book in particular couldn't have been mapped in reading order. Luckily, on the positive, the first Krakoa Omnibus, the Dawn of X Volume 1, that one is in reading order, not even publication order, but like actual reading order. So Marvel is listening, and I got to give them a lot of credit for that. And I'm looking forward to the Krakoa Omnibuses being in reading order because that'll make for a better experience reading the books. But when I get to the end of it, I will have to start flipping back and forth. I'll probably make sticky notes. I'll be like, okay, this series is here, and then just start flipping through it like it's a school textbook or something. But That's the problem with Marvel Omnibus mapping. Now, you're probably wondering, because I haven't mentioned it this whole time, how does DC do their event omnibuses? The funny part when I announced I was going to do this video is I did not realize I don't own a single event omnibus for DC. And I'm usually a bigger DC guy than Marvel, but DC events, I find in general, DC doesn't do as many events, and a lot of them aren't character tied. They're like whole universe tied. And for me, I'm good just having the main miniseries, right? Like I don't have the Death Metal Omnibus. I just have the deluxe edition of the main miniseries. And maybe with some of the Marvel events, I would have been cool with that as well. It just depends. But with this, I don't actually have any first-hand experience. However, I have done my research. I have picked 3 examples of omnibuses that have come out. I went and checked Infinite Crisis. Infinite Crisis has all of the tie-in issues. Everything that's related to Infinite Crisis is put into the Infinite Crisis Omnibus, and it is in reading order of what sequence of events that happens. That also means it's going to take a couple hundred pages before you get to the actual Infinite Crisis part, and so if you're not into the storyline, it could be a bit of a slog of a read, but the good part is it has a table of contents, so you can just skip forward and not worry about it. Same thing goes for 0 Hour. 0 Hour has all of its tie-ins included in reading order, which is good because you have everything included. It's not the greatest reading experience because a lot of 0 Hour tie-ins don't seem to tie into the event as directly, but once again, it has a table of contents with the page numbers, so you can just flip right to the next issue of the main event if you're so looking for that. But I like the way the 0 Hour Omnibus is mapped because the 0 Hour is a crisis in time. It's affecting all the books kind of equally, where some are having bigger effects than others, and you can kind of see the wide spread of the effects of 0 Hour across the way that is mapped. And then Dark Knight's Death Metal also has all of its tie-ins in the proper order, because Death Metal is a series that doesn't make much sense on its own. This is just the 7-issue miniseries, and the only reason I got this is because I own all the DC Crisis events, and I was like, well, if I'm going to get it, I'm going to get the deluxe hardcover. But Death Metal, reading it when it came out, it doesn't make any damn sense. And you need these tie-ins. There's an issue that's the Death Metal Guidebook that explains how the whole multiverse setup works. This is not an event I love, but if I did, I would want the Omnibus, because the Omnibus has all the one-shots, all the extra tie-in miniseries, everything in the proper reading order. Based on what I looked at through the table of contents, I looked at somebody's overview of the Omnibus. I was like, okay, this is mapped how it should be so that you can read it and understand everything that's going on to the best of your ability. I still find it to be a confusing story, even with all that context. But in general, I'm having trouble finding an issue with any of the mapping in any DC event omnibuses, where, like Marvel, where they put the entire miniseries up front and nothing makes sense behind it. I'm not having that issue, and all the research I've done in DC. But let me know in the comments if you have any issues with the DC event omnibus mapping. In general, though, DC does not do as many event omnibuses as you'd think. But in the case of that, it seems like they do it well for the most part. And again, maybe there's people out there like, oh, I like having the main miniseries up front for Marvel events because that means I don't have to read any of the tie-ins. And honestly, to that point, I read the 4 issues of Doctor Strange's Damnation, skipped to the Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider part and dipped because, those other issues I might have read if they were in between the story, but I just read the main miniseries and the Ghost Rider part, and that was the whole reason I picked it up, because Ghost Rider things was why I own this. So maybe there is something to be said about throwing the miniseries up front and the tie-ins in the back. But something like Fall of the House of X, that really should have been in reading order for everybody's sake. So that's my take on event omnibuses and how they're mapped. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was clear. If it wasn't, like I said, comment section is open. Also, of course, if you haven't already, hit the like button, subscribe to the notification bell so you know that there will be more comic videos on the channel. We've been kind of building the comic audience for a while, and it's blown up, so there definitely will be more in the future, so you don't want to miss out. If you also want to keep up with the channel and join our community, you can join our Discord server in the link below. We got all kinds of cool stuff down there. We got some reading guides, been experimenting with that more and more. You can also just talk about comics down there. If you want to get early access to videos, you can join as a channel member and get special shoutouts as well. Let's give some special shoutouts to those channel members. Special shout out to all of our channel members, including Captain Tiers, Spin-54, Masterbed95, Forever1000, Super Shaddix Boom, Mr. Smelly Potato, Kaiju954, Rivers, Cameron Meter, Orville Conception Reviews, Adam Maggle, Cal Birdwell, Crestfallen Thoughts at Midnight, Boinkbach, Van Jill Georgia, Mohammed Faiz Daniel, Dr. Grid, Oni Onichan, David Johnson, K Slim, Starwho, James Abel, Jamie's World, Veloquince, Rabbitman, Daniel Evans, Zizu426, Common Pikachu, John Troutman, Spidey Brian, Fernando Perea, Smotlock, Lord Tapman, Henry G, Caro, Gang 1, Sebastian Travez. Thank you all for your support, both viewers and members alike. If you so wish, you can find me on social media on Blue Sky and Letterboxd at Soundout12, my wonderful graphic designers on social media and Discord at DarkClaw643, and you can find Hero Club at hero-club.com for comic reviews and more. And until next time, this is Soundout saying goodbye.